When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Rescom YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be doing Sansa IV A Game of Thrones on our reread. And again, I think I want to give a lot of credit to George on the placement of this chapter, right? I think we look at, not last chapter, the chapter before with Ned's basically being betrayed by Littlefinger, his capture. You almost forget about the other characters that are in King's Landing at the time with Sansa and Arya. And so when you get these two POVs back to back, kind of looking at the fallout, right? How did this affect our other two POVs in King's Landing? And so I think it's really great because it's almost the polar opposites. Where we've talked about Arya and Sansa have been the complete opposite characters the entire story up to this point. And even now, not only are their characters different, but their POVs are very much different. Where Arya was basically on this Assassin's Creed type get out of King's Landing type mission, Sansa is the complete opposite. She's in structure, right? She's completely safe. There's nothing really going on with her character, right? She was sitting out this conflict while Arya was experiencing the conflict firsthand. And so that's an interesting parallel to look at the two characters, where Arya has always been more wild, right? She's always been more headstrong, where Sansa's always been follow the rules, stay out of the dirty stuff going on, not take a lot of action. And so I like that really reflects the two different plot lines going on after Ned's coup, or failed coup, I should say. But as we get into Sansa's chapter, she notes that they came for her on the third day after the fighting. Again, she's been locked in this room for about 3 days after that fighting with Ned. As we saw with Arya's chapter, they'd been fighting in the Tower of the Hand. Makes a lot of sense. Again, they're trying to take out all the Stark loyalists. And so we see that she's basically been sitting here for a while. Very similar to like Arianne in her chapter in A Feast for Crows. But we also find out that she had Jane Poole placed with her, but she was of no comfort or help. Again, Jane Poole is deeply frightened by what's going on, right? She's seeing what's happening. She's realizing people are dying, that her father may be in some trouble. All the people that you know, right, are either being arrested or killed. Most of them are being killed. So it's a really shocking thing to see at such a young age like Jane Poole is. And so Sansa very much in this chapter, again, comes off as somebody that's, I don't know how to put it, like, she just feels like she's better than everyone else. That's kind of how she feels in this first book, that she's more mature than Jane or whatever. And it really plays off that way. But you also have to think about it from this point of view of Sansa. Sansa doesn't know what's going on at all, right? She's gotten assurances from the queen that basically everything's going to be okay and to stay in this room, all this. So she is probably under the illusion that it can't be anything too bad, right? But as she starts to think about it, as she processes it more, she starts to realize that might not be the truth. So again, it's more like Jane Poole understands more or less what's going on, whereas Sansa almost has no idea. But she spent most of the time crying for her father, Jane Poole anyway, not Sansa. Sansa thinks that she is just a child crying, which is ironic given the future that Sansa will have, and even she admits that she was crying as well. But Sansa believes that her father is probably fine, and again, thinking this is a fairy tale. They wouldn't kill her father. Again, Sansa is coming at it from this angle of, oh, in the stories, they never tell you about the innocents that are killed, the people that are not bearing weapons, that aren't the people that are making decisions, but they just get caught in the crossfire. Think about A Feast for Crows, Brienne. That's really what her whole plot is about, almost. And so Sansa's kind of putting it from that lens, as she's so young that she still believes these things. But yeah, Sansa kind of comes off as a hypocrite because she herself was crying on the first day, as she'd heard all the fighting. And again, she had heard this all of her life, but it being real made all the difference. As we go into page 553, again, we talk about this a lot when it comes to swordplay and practicing or whatnot. It's been a common theme that I've talked about in almost, I feel like, every chapter that we've done in the past, like 10 or 15 chapters, is bearing a sword is not the same as actually wielding it in an actual battle or in a combat where one of you is going to die. It's just different. The sounds of death and war and people scared of what is to come after, again, death is a very scary thing because it's a fear of the unknown, right? It's not as much about maybe the pain or whatnot. It's what comes after, right? Is there some sort of afterlife? Is there some sort of thing after death? And for a lot of people, that's something that I think really everyone has thought about that at some point in their life, is something that's just scary to think about. And yeah, so I think that is another part of it, is like you're fighting so desperately to survive and to not have to find out what that means. And also, you're looking at these soldiers, it's like, if you're the average Stark man, right, or you're a guardsman, whatever, you don't know what's really going on, right? Ned's maybe told you, oh, protect my daughters stationed here. You don't know why the Lannisters are attacking you. And so that's a whole nother aspect of it. But getting into page 543, Sansa notes that they were different sounds, the sounds of death and slaughter, like we talked about. Sansa had cried out for many people, Mordain, Ned, Joffrey, but she got no answer until Jane Poole was thrust into her room. And we're going to talk about later on why that was actually a mistake by the Lannisters, but it's not yet at this point of the story. Sansa doesn't know why Jane was put here. And again, if you're thinking about this, if you're just an average soldier or you're a Kingsguard, you're thinking, what's the harm in putting Jane Poole with Sansa, right? It's somebody that might give Sansa some comfort. The two know each other. You can see why they thought about that. But Jane had told her that they were killing everyone and that the Hound had broken down her door with a war hammer. The two had gone to sleep crying together in bed. Again, Sansa still coming off very hypocritical as she was crying at this point as well. But think about this scary scene for a young girl. You have this really scary, dude in the Hound with his Hound mask breaking down your door. And for what reason, right? Like, there's no soldiers in your room. There's none of that, right? It's like, so I think it's part of that is just like Jane Poole just has gotten firsthand visuals of what's going on, whereas Sansa is having to imagine what is happening. But Sansa notes that the second day was worse. It was completely silent as a grave. She noted more Lannister men in their presence, and they were fed by servants, but whenever she tried to talk to them, they would flee. Again, I made the note again to Arianne 2 and A Feast for Crows. I think that chapter was heavily inspired by Sansa's fourth chapter in this book because they really play out a lot of the same, right? A lot of unknown, a lot of you don't know what's going on, what is going to be your fate, what's happening, and all of that's kind of revealed later on. And so I think George took a lot of inspiration when writing that chapter from this one. Again, Sansa tries to tell them she needs to speak to Cersei or to Joffrey, as she is set to marry him, but again, she gets no response. Again, Cersei's playing at this idea that, like, she's in high favor with the queen, and, she has a good relationship with Joffrey, so she just wants to figure out what's going on. But again, on the second day of their imprisonment, they heard the bells ringing for a while, and Sansa knew that the king was dead. Which is a good observation, right? Understanding why those bells would be going off. And now when you kind of put that together with, oh, okay, the king's dead, maybe that's why there was some sort of conflict. Now, she doesn't really get to why there was a conflict, but that's a pretty good observation that is a point of it, is like, what happened to the king? She had many questions. Was the castle stormed and the king killed? Was Joffrey king, or was he killed and Ned too? It is interesting to think about, like, was the castle stormed? That one kind of seems very far-fetched. Like, how would that even happen? But again, she is coming to the right conclusion that the king was killed. But even as she slept that night, she dreamt of herself next to Joffrey on the throne, looking down on everyone she had ever known, watching them bow to her. Again, Sansa, all she ever wants to be is to marry her sweet prince like the fairy tales and be queen. And again, I don't blame Sansa for wanting this position of being queen. It's what she's been told she's going to get for a while now. Once you introduce that to someone this young, that's all they're going to want. And so, again, I think a lot of people are very harsh, myself included, on Sansa as a character early on in the books. And I'm trying to see her, her side more. And this is a very pivotal chapter for this, because I think a lot of people already, if you're reading the books, would not have liked Sansa. But this chapter pretty much nails it in the coffin. Like, you just are not going to like Sansa because of this chapter specifically. But still. But on the third day, Boris Blunt came for her to take her to the queen. Sansa notes, or thinks, she didn't really say it, but she thinks about how ugly he was. But he was dressed splendidly. Again, for Sansa, everything is about physical appearance or what someone is dressed as. Again, why would she have this conception? Catelyn coming to the capital, hearing all these stories, Think about the way that she idolizes Cersei, because Cersei is basically that, right? She's beautiful in Sansa's eyes. She dresses really fashionably well. All of that is what Sansa inspires to be. So when you have someone in this chapter like Cersei manipulating Sansa, it's not that hard for Sansa to believe, because this is basically what she strives to be. And so all of that's really important to understand, because if you think about it from like this point of view, like think about if you're someone that is a soldier, like think about your Bran. Bran's hero would be meeting Barristan. So if Barristan was trying to get Bran to do something, it would be fairly easy to do. It's a kind of the same thing here, but just a little more difficult, because it's, you know, a really tough issue for Sansa and to manipulate her on. But with that being said, she does tell him that he looks handsome, and he responds by saying she also looks great, and told her that the queen awaits. Again, Sansa being pleasant, trying to be cordial, and not insulting him. But Sansa notes there were guards about and tried to greet them politely, noting it was the first time she had spoken to anyone besides Jane since Eris Oakheart had put her in the room, which gets us into page 545. Again, this is where the juiciness of the chapter really starts, when we get to Cersei and we get to kind of the big reveal, some of the other stuff that was going on during Ned's coup. But Cersei had told her it was for her protection, and Joffrey would be displeased if anything happened to her. Again, this is all very suspicious, right? If you're a reader and you're thinking about, wait, what? Sansa was talking to Cersei, and Cersei is the one that had her placed in this room to stay out of it? Okay, that's very suspicious. Why? When did that happen? And so now you have this question formulated in your head, like, I wonder what happened. And if we even go back to the last chapter, we're sitting here going, yeah, Sansa's last meal with Ned and Arya didn't go particularly well. She wanted to go say goodbye to her love and Joffrey, and again, her idol and Cersei, and she wasn't allowed to do that. And she's also leaving behind everything that she's ever wanted. For Arya, it's not hard to leave. For Ned, it's not hard to leave. But for Sansa, it's very difficult to do that. But Sansa is led from Maegor's holdfast as she sees a man being lowered into the moat, and she's too afraid to see who it was, or if it was someone she knew. Again, makes a lot of sense, right? Sansa is not someone that likes to see the dirty parts of life, and also just noticing that this could be someone that she knew. But they find Cersei in the council chambers, with Cersei having many scrolls and letters around her. Again, seems obvious as a very busy time, right? You just now put Joffrey on the throne. There's going to be a lot of questions asked. There's going to be a lot of messages you need to send to people like Tywin, Jaime, about what are the circumstances of the war right now? Like, what's going to happen following Joffrey's ascension? But Sansa notes is the best decorated room that she had ever seen, which is actually very high praise, given Sansa cares a lot about those things. But Boris announces their arrival, and Mandon Moore says he has brought her. Sansa had hoped to see Joffrey here, but he was absent. Only Pycelle, Littlefinger, Varys, and Cersei were there. Again, Varys specifically smelling flowery as usual, all wearing mourning clothes. And Sansa already picks up on this. She realizes, wait, everybody is in mourning clothes, and she already thinks that Robert is probably dead. It's a good observation from Sansa, and it really paints the way this conversation is going to go down. But Sansa notes the insanely cool dress that Cersei has. There's not a lot of descriptions, again, because I'm not really a fashion person, but Cersei has this really cool dress that is black, but it has rubies that are in the shapes of teardrops going down her dress. I think it's an insanely cool dress. It reminds me of like the Targaryen colors, which is kind of interesting. If you think about this being Robert's funeral or whatever, and here is Cersei wearing Targaryen colors and also wearing rubies that are something that would have been in, again, with Rhaegar. His breastplate had rubies. It was all over the ruby ford, as they say. And so that is quite interesting, right? Just to think about Cersei maybe just spitting on Robert's grave, more or less. Cersei then notes sweetly that she knows that she has been asking for her, but things have been very unsettled and busy, and asks if she has been well taken care of. Sansa notes that they have, and she specifically says that us have been well taken care of, meaning her and Jane. And this is a shock to Cersei. She takes an interest in this and asks us. Again, in Cersei's mind, there shouldn't have been anyone with Sansa. And the question is, why Is that the case? Because you might be thinking, I brought up an argument earlier, like you would want Sansa to be as calm as possible. So you give her her childhood friend in Jane, someone to talk to. Maybe it'll make manipulating her easier. But that isn't the case at all. Because in the opposite of this, Jane Poole can tell what is actually going on. She can tell her information about what is happening, right? Think back to how we talked about with the Hound breaking down the door and all these men being killed. Cersei wants to control the flow of information right now and make Sansa believe what she is going to tell her. It'll make it much more easy to manipulate her. And that's something that I think is interesting, because the person that controls all the information in a situation is going to win. They're going to be the person that is going to be able to manipulate the other person. And that's the point here. And that's why Cersei is so up in arms about this. But Boris notes that they had put the steward's girl with her, and Cersei scolds him next time he will ask her and wonders what tales she has told Sansa. Again, I think this is very smart from Cersei. I think Cersei could have been a little nicer to Boris about this, but I agree, right? I agree with why she wouldn't want that to happen in her reasoning. Sansa notes she is only scared, and she said she would ask about Jane seeing her father. At this, Sansa notes Pycelle lowering his eyes at her. Again, an ill omen, meaning something probably not good happened to her father. And Sansa kind of notices this right away. Sansa anxiously asks if he is all right. She doesn't see why he wouldn't. He was a steward. He didn't even wear a sword. He was no threat to the Lannisters or whoever would have attacked him in her mind. Why would he be dead? Again, this goes directly back to Arya's chapter. When we see Mullen, he's also been killed. Their master of horses, he's dead as well. But would he have fought back? Did he have a sword? Was he a knight? Was he a skilled swordsman? No. Again, it paints this picture that Sansa's not exactly seeing. Cersei looks at her counselors and asks, what will they do with Jane? And Littlefinger says he will find a place for her. Again, Cersei notes, hopefully taken outside of the city. Littlefinger says he isn't dumb. Again, Cersei wants Jane as far away from all this stuff as humanly possible, because she is one of the last remaining people that have any information as to what actually occurred. Cersei notes she wants her gone before Sansa returns, to take her to Littlefinger's apartments, and to tell her Littlefinger will take her to him. Again, just manipulating Jane, making her come calmly, and trying to control all the information and manipulating people as you possibly can. All of this makes sense from Cersei, right? Right now, she's, I think, playing this pretty well. Now, giving Jane Poole specifically to Littlefinger, I don't know about that one, though. Sansa at this was completely confused. Why did Jane need to be taken to Littlefinger, not to her father? Again, Sansa can tell this doesn't add up, right? Seems a little suspicious. But for a second, she wanted to cry, but she doesn't, asking where she is sending her, and that Jane is a good girl. Cersei notes that because she upset you, and not... Cersei notes that she upset you, and not to worry, she will be taken care of, and beckons her to sit with her. Again, Cersei doesn't answer the question, right? She just tries to talk around it, be nice to Sansa, and then just end that whole conversation. Sansa sits next to her, but even Cersei's smile could not make her feel less anxious. And that gets us into page 547. Again, Sansa is not stupid, right? We talk about Sansa in a lot of ways that she is kind of stupid, but she's at least reading this kind of correctly, that there's just something not particularly right about this. But Sansa notes Pycelle's sleepy look, Varys schemy as ever, and Littlefinger, his eyes dug into her, almost making her feel naked. Again, quite a description there, right? Like, you can tell that Littlefinger has ulterior motives with Sansa, and even Sansa can feel that. But Cersei takes her wrist and says she hopes she knows how much Joffrey and her love her. Now think about why Cersei would start with that. She knows that she's about to ask Sansa to do something really difficult to do, and it's going to take a lot of fluff. It's going to take a lot of compliments. It's going to take a lot of things to reassure Sansa, and that's the one thing that Sansa wants to hear above all things. That her prince that she loves her back. Basically, your crush likes you. And that Cersei, the woman that Sansa looks up to the most, outside of maybe her mother, but even at this point, I'd say it's pretty close, says that she loves Sansa. That's a huge thing to start out with. That's big for Sansa. But Sansa thinks, wait, you do? And even more, that Joffrey loves her too. This is all that Sansa, again, has ever wanted. But Cersei notes that she thinks of her as her own daughter and knows how much she loves Joffrey. But she says that there's grave news of her father, and she must be brave. Again, think about the way we did this information. Cersei is very clever and smart the way she does this. She does something that's very positive for Sansa, going to calm her down a lot, and then slides in that really bad thing, the really sad thing. And the words give Sansa a chill, and she asked, what news? And Varys says, very bluntly I might add, that Ned is a traitor. Pycelle confirms, saying he heard Ned promise to protect his children, but as soon as Robert was dead, he tried to steal Joffrey's throne. Again, using truth with a lie. All of that's true. Ned did promise to protect Robert's children, it's just they're not Robert's children. So again, a truth with a lie. Very nice lie there from Pycelle. But before Sansa can think, she blurts out that he would never. Cersei notes a letter that confirms that Ned had sent a letter with the captain of his guard inviting him to take the crown. That's interesting, because in Sansa's mind, that's enough evidence to probably say that Ned did at least do something, even if Sansa doesn't fully believe it. Sansa notes that there must be a mistake. Let me send for him. He loved Robert. Cersei notes that Robert believed he did as well. It is a mercy that he was not alive to see the betrayal. She notes how she is in a precarious position, as Sansa is the daughter of a traitor and not fit to marry Joffrey. Again, a lot of things are coming out, but here's the one thing that Cersei does really good here in this situation. She uses what she knows Sansa wants the most and uses it as this like dangling reward. If you do all I want you to do, you may get this. It's perfect manipulation by Cersei, and when we talk about Cersei later on in the story, as she becomes more mentally unstable, at this point in the story, she is making like really good moves, manipulating people pretty well. But Sansa instantly wails that no, she loves him. Again, the one thing that links Sansa to what is about to happen is Joffrey, and Cersei as well, because she's a role model for Sansa, but especially Sansa's believed love for Joffrey. Sansa's in shock, wondering what they will do with her and what has happened to her father. She notes it is unfair that they were to be betrothed and she had dreamed about it. Again, Sansa's still pretty much in the dark, right? Even though she's heard, oh yeah, there's been some sort of treason and whatnot, it doesn't really seem to make sense to Sansa. But yet she doesn't know what actually happened. Is Ned dead at this point? Is he injured? Is he just imprisoned? What's going to happen with her, right? She's now the daughter of a traitor. And Sansa also says, again, that she loves Joffrey and she loves Cersei. And Cersei notes she knows that Sansa does. Why else would she come to her and tell her of her father's plans to have them leave the city? And this is the big reveal, right? Because you're sitting here and you're going, yeah, it did kind of seem interesting that Cersei was ahead of Ned. It seems like so much during Ned's coup. And there's a multitude of things, right? Littlefinger basically switching to Cersei's side, which he was probably already on her side, more or less. And also you have Sansa basically completing this, right? Basically falling directly into the trap. We talked about in that chapter why it would be stupid to send Sansa to see Cersei or Cersei or Joffrey, because it was basically giving them a hostage. And so we see in this situation that Sansa willingly left and went there and screwed over Ned even more. Now, it's understandable why she did so. I'm not going to keep repeating myself because I talked about it in the last Ned video. I talked about it in this one. It makes perfect sense as to why Sansa would do this. Because Ned seems very irrational in the way he's acting from Sansa's POV. Sansa was not being told anything by Ned. Basically just saying, we have to go back to Winterfell. That's my decision. That is not enough for a kid at this point, especially when you're taking away her dreams. And so I think a little bit of that blame does lie on Ned not being able to communicate, just like how Robb isn't with Edmure later on in the story. And so to me, this is a point that we look at Sansa and we say, yeah, that was really dumb. Why did you do that? But given her perspective, it is a bit more understandable. But Sansa says it was for love and remembers defying her father on the morning, getting away from Mordain. At first, she thought to go to Robert, but he scared her and sent her back to Ned anyway. So again, she goes to the role model. She goes to the person she wants to be. Instead, she went to Cersei, who was again kind and sweet, and escorted her back to her apartments. And shortly after the fighting began. Again, it all fits into place now. You all start to understand what actually happened. Why was Sansa not involved in this at all? But Sansa once again begs to marry Joffrey, and she'll be as good a queen as Cersei. Cersei asks what her counselors think of her plea. Again, Varys notes that she is a poor child and her love seems true, but what can they do? Ned has been condemned for his actions. Again, it makes sense. You don't want to marry a traitor's daughter to the king. It doesn't really add up. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So again, just taking that obvious route, and also to kind of put into Sansa's mind, if she doesn't do what Cersei wants her to do, you're not in a good spot. And so all of this is basically just a show, right? Cersei already knows what's going to happen, but she's wanting them to say these things to really put it into perspective of what Sansa has to do. Pycelle notes that she has traitor's blood and will betray them at some point. In 10 years, who knows what treason she will do. And Pycelle is right. He is right. Who knows what Sansa is going to be doing in Winds of Winter. But Sansa says she would never betray Joffrey. She loves him. But Varys notes, in one of my favorite lines so far of the first book, Varys notes that blood tends to run truer than oaths. A great line, because when you think about that, it implies so much, right? Family, your own personal, I guess, line means more than oaths. Think about, why do the Night's Watch not have wives? Why do they give up their families? Why do they not have kids? It's because of this exact thing. When we talk about Maester Aemon and Jon Snow, it's a really perfect segue. It's a line that's very underrated. It goes under, really, I think, everything. But when you think about Jon and the things he's going to have to deal with in his upcoming chapters, this line is perfect. And so I really like this line. It's one that I think I forgot about, but just such a good line. And of course, coming from Varys, he has so many banger lines, especially in the next book. But that'll get us into page 549. But what I find is more interesting is, like, Littlefinger doesn't even really add to the conversation. He just basically is lusting after Sansa even now. But all Littlefinger has to say is that her blood looks more like Catelyn's than Ned's. She is the very look of Cat at this age. Again, it's just Littlefinger being a pedophile. Cersei says she wishes nothing more to believe she was not like Ned and to wed her to Joffrey, who loves her so much. But she asks, how is she to forget Arya and her wolf savagely attacking Joffrey? And again, I want to point in here something else. Cersei again slyly reminds Sansa that Joffrey loves her so much. Again, putting in another compliment, something that Sansa wants to hear before getting to the main point of this chapter, getting Sansa to write these letters. Sansa says that Arya has traitor's blood, not her, which is ironic given the situation, right? Like, us, the readers, we know it's kind of flipped. Arya is the one that's the truest to the Starks, and Sansa's the one that betrayed her father. Cersei says she believes her, but she says if all her kin were to remain loyal during this time, that would go a long way. We get to the part of the chapter that we've been waiting for. Like, why is this whole conversation going on? It's because they're manipulating Sansa to make it to where they don't have to go to war. Pycelle notes that Ned has 3 boys, but Littlefinger notes that they are boys. The real worry was Catelyn and the Tullys. Again, ever Littlefinger bringing it back to Catelyn because it's all he can kind of think about. But also it shows, again, they're underestimating Robb, something that even Tywin will do later in this book. But Cersei took her hands in her own and asked if she knew her letters. Sansa nervously says she does. She was better than any of them except for in sums. Again, talking about her siblings. Cersei says she must write to Cat and her eldest brother, who Sansa says is named Robb. That gets into page 550. Cersei says she must tell them of Ned's treasons. Again, better to come from her than to come from other people informing them of this knowledge. And again, it's a good plan from Cersei. It's kind of just a Hail Mary, right? There's no harm being done from this, right? At least in one regard, going to try to get them to step down. And if not, oh well, right? And so I think Cersei realizes there's going to be conflict because of this regardless. Like, you imprison Ned, there's not much that Sansa's words are going to do, but I think it's important to at least try. right? Put some sort of doubt in their mind and have to decipher what the truth really is. But Sansa wanted Joffrey badly, but she did not know if she could do it. She continued saying she did not know what to say in the letters. Cersei says that they will tell her what to say, that they want to have peace, to tell them she's being well treated, and to come south to bend the knee to Joffrey. And after this is accomplished, Sansa will be allowed to marry Joffrey. Again, dangling this fruit above Sansa that if you do all these things, you get this. Sansa hesitated. She wanted to, but she asked to see her father, to talk to him. But this is not the answer they wanted. Again, why would they not want Sansa to talk to Ned? Because Ned will tell her the truth. Will be able to tell her things that they don't want her, Sansa to know, because then Sansa is not going to be as willing to betray her father. And so they are basically going to pull the "we're disappointed in you" thing. But Varys notes that they will talk about what? Treason? And Cersei notes her disappointment. Again, Cersei does not want Sansa hearing the truth. But this is also where we see Cersei flip. Up to this point, Cersei has been very kind and nice and manipulating Sansa, but now that Cersei kind of sees that that's not enough, she goes cold. Her stare is cold to Sansa, and she asks Sansa why she would want to see him after hearing of his treasons. Sansa, now crying, says he hasn't been hurt or anything, correct? And Cersei notes that he has not been harmed, but Sansa asks what is to become of him. And Pycelle says his fate will be determined by the king. Again, once again, ironically, Sansa is as happy as ever, thinking that her gallant prince was the king now and would never harm her father if she asked him not to. Again, Sansa completely misreading the situation, but in theory, she has a decent thought process. She would need to beg for him, but she still, again, this is the part I find very interesting about Sansa, is that she's smart enough to realize there's no situation now in which Ned is just free to go, like he's released. Either he's going to go into a exile, or he's going to be sent to the Wall, or whatnot. There's no way he gets out of this without any type of punishment, because the other lords would expect it. But that gets us into page 551. Sansa hopes that he could be sent into exile, or maybe even to Winterfell, which is not likely at all. And eventually she could persuade for him to be sent back later when she was queen. Again, a decent thought process. If she has control over Joffrey, maybe she could do that exact thing. It's really a lot of how Dany is going to start interacting with Drogo, trying to convince him to do things and trying to persuade him and manipulate him a little bit. But if her mother or brother did anything treasonous, it would mess up everything, and so she had to persuade them to do fealty and bend the knee. Again, Cersei's manipulation is perfect here. Sansa says she will write the letters, and Cersei is pleased to hear that, kissing her on the cheek. She wrote 4 letters, one to Robb, Catelyn, Hoster, and Lysa. By the time she was done, her hand was cramping. She then seals the letters. When she returned, Jane was gone, and everything felt a bit colder, even after building a fire. She pulled her chairs close to the hearth, began reading her stories, again, all these fairy tales, Aemon the Dragon Knight, all that stuff. And only then did she forget that she forgot to ask about her sister. And that's a crazy thing to think about. Arya completely forgets to ask about the well-being of her sister. And I don't really think it's that outlandish, given that Sansa doesn't like Arya, right? She calls her a traitor in this chapter. And so I think this is definitely one of those moments where you're sitting here going, really, Sansa? You forgot about your sister? Now, my reasoning for this and why I think that was actually quite human is given what's going on. There's so many questions that Sansa would have above what's going on with her sister. What's happening with her father? What's the status of the kingdom? Why was all their killing and all these things? All this manipulation going on. Her dream, right? She's at a crossroads. Will she take her dream or will she not? And basically become a prisoner or whatnot. She thinks is going to happen. And so that's kind of the way the chapter ends. But I also think this is very interesting, given that she thinks the room is colder, even though there's a fire. This, in my opinion, is meant to symbolize, and I think it's a really nice, sly way of doing this from George, is it's really the last moment that Sansa has a true friend at court. Jane is the last person that, again, knows Sansa really well. They are friends going back to Winterfell. It was the last person that wouldn't have had any thoughts of like using her for some type of game or this way or that, which is what she's going to experience for the next really 3 books. Her whole story is her being used by this character or that. And so, yeah, I think that's very interesting. It's a really awful way to end this chapter for Sansa, given that it's her forgetting about Arya. But I have to admit, like, if you're someone that comes out of book 1 and you can understand Sansa, you are not able to, like, you actually still like the character or whatnot, even after all of this. It's like, yes, you can understand the character, but her decisions are just so detrimental to all of our other characters going on at the time. And so I look at this and I go, yeah, I mean, think about all of her chapters, right? Her first chapter is her with Joffrey, witnessing Joffrey almost kill her sister, and then lies, and when all that goes down, it's just not a lot of good look, right? There's a lot of bad moments for Sansa's first book that are gonna make learning experiences for her going forward. But thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed. And for the Sansa haters, how do you guys feel that I believe this video is longer than Arya's video after Ned's coup? So for those people, you guys are probably not very happy right now. But yeah, thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.